So Scott asked me to come up with a good title for the talk, and that's why I came up with what Lady Gaga, Kevin Kline, Chandler Bing can teach us about key moments along the path of donation. So first of all, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite little jokes that I haven't told in a while. It occurred to me when I was visiting the OPO the other day, and that is 3 men are on a deserted island, just the 3 of them. They've been there for 20 years, can't get off. And one day, sure enough, a bottle washes ashore. There's a genie in the bottle, 3 wishes, 3 men. It's a perfect story. And the first man takes the bottle and holds it close to himself and says, I miss my wife, I miss my kids, I miss my life. Like that back home. Second man takes the bottle, holds it close to himself and says, I miss my career, I had a big life, I had all this money, I had just so many things to do, I just want to go back. Like that, he's back. Third man takes the bottle, holds it close to himself and says, I really love my life here. I've never been happier, it's peaceful, it's beautiful, but I sure do miss those 2 guys. The moral of the story is, it's good to be moving in the same direction. So this is a fresco from a 19th century painter, Elias Martinez, and obviously in great disrepair in this church. And enter Cecilia Jimenez. Cecilia Jimenez is a wonderful parishioner in her 80s, paints a little, and goes to the pastor and says, can I fix this up because it's really falling apart and I think I can make it better. And you've all seen the pictures, haven't you? So Cecilia Jimenez, you know, this has been disputed, but she got the pastor's permission to do this. And what Cecilia produced was this. So on this church wall is now this fresco. And of course, I mean, and the moral of that story is good intentions do not make up for skill, knowledge, and expertise. And so, I mean, this has become infamous. And so infamous that, you know, a la internet, nowadays we have this tribute. And if you want to know the postscript to the story is the good news. This church, not only was the fresco in disrepair, the church didn't have any money, things were falling apart. And since Cecilia Jimenez created this, tourists have flocked to this church. And the church is financially sound again and doing really well. Busloads of tourists are coming in just to take pictures of themselves in front of Jesus here. But the additional postscript is the fact that Cecilia Jimenez is now suing the church because she thinks she's entitled to some of the proceeds that are coming in because of her painting. So just an interesting, although she does want to donate them to a charity. So it's always more complicated than we know. Anyway, so just so you know the direction of, you know, the people that you come to meet through donation, these people that visit your hospitals and work with you, I think it needs to be stated, what is our philosophy of donation conversations? It's simply this, and I say this probably 30 times a week. We help families make their best decision in their worst moment based on their values and their beliefs. That's it. We do not try to get a yes from a family. The team that I work with, they know that is not our goal. We are simply with a family who's in a hot emotional state. So going back to that first talk a little earlier, we're simply trying to really cut through all of that and help them make their best decision in their worst moment based on their values and beliefs. And we always expand that to say, if 3 weeks before, this same family had been gathered at table together and they were discussing donation and they had all the information they wanted, whatever decision they would have made about donation in that moment is the same decision we would like to help them to make in this moment. That's all we're trying to do. And I always expand that to say, so that 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years from now, this family can look back upon this decision and feel completely confident of the decision that they made. So we are not shooting for a yes, go in there and get a yes from that family. All we are doing is saying, go and have a meaningful conversation explore the values and the beliefs of that family. I'm not a really good golfer. I'm a hockey player from Canada. So shoot, score are the last words in my mind when I hit a golf ball. That's the antithesis of good golf. Because good golf is all about a swing that is grooved and the ball just happens to be in the middle of your stance. And therefore it's repeatable. When you try to hit the ball, you play very badly, as I do. We're not shooting for a yes in a donation conversation. We're trying to have a meaningful conversation based on the values and beliefs of this family. And we think a yes flows from that or a no flows from that. But there's integrity to that conversation. And the other thing from my staff, they're not trying to manufacture something. What they're trying to do is help that family to see what this moment of donation might mean for them in the way of their values, their beliefs, their tribute to their loved one, whatever would be meaningful. So I'm going to ask you this very simple question. If we could speak to families 1 month after the death of their loved one about donation, what would be the percentage of families saying yes to donation? I don't usually do this interactively, but tell me, what do you think? 90%. Wow. I mean, every time I say that, ask that question, that's the answer I get, 90%. So what does that tell us? The circumstances of the moment, the heat of the moment, the hot states, all that interrupted thinking are really interrupting, helping that family make their best decision. So how do we help that family make their best decision in their worst moment? Especially, you know, I gave this example yesterday as kind of a fun thing. So you all know Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, that show with Regis that first came out. And they play it in French. It's called Qui veut gagner des millions? And they play it the same way. You know, you ask the audience, phone a friend, 50-50. But the French are a little different. And so I'll give you an example. Henri on this particular day is in the hot seat. The first 5 questions are still the idiot questions, so we can give you $1,000 and you can be on your way. So Henri, on the second question, the question is, what revolves around the earth? Henri is blanking out, like he just can't think, I don't know. And you know, it's the 4 answers of, is it the sun, the moon, is it Venus, is it Mars? So Henri is not thinking clearly, he's in a hot state and he's out of it. So he decides to ask the audience, he asks the audience, and 56% tell him it's the sun. 42% tell him it's the moon, and the rest divided between Venus and Mars and just crazy people. So Henri, like now he's confused because he's thinking, I can't be right, but he goes with the audience. Of course, he's eliminated. And, you know, so why did they give him, are the French, you know, simply ignorant of planetary movement? And if the French don't like the contestant, they I love your reaction, because that is so un-American, isn't it? We help anyone. It doesn't matter who you are in that chair. If we can help you, you look like you need help. We would never just manufacture answers to sabotage this person. The Russians even play it in a more severe way. But, you know, most of us think we will help someone given a chance. That really is the American ethos in my mind, that we help people given a chance. And that's why all of us are thinking, 90% of us, given a chance to save a life, say yes to donation. So what we are simply trying to do in our work is this. There's a lot of debris on the road along that path to donation, along that path to 90% of families that we believe would embrace this as a meaningful decision in honor of their loved one. And what we need to do is to help that family clear the debris. You heard me mention earlier, when a family feels well cared for, communicated with by the hospital staff, when those conditions of predictability, familiarity, control, and support have been accommodated for that family, when we speak to the family, there's actually just a little debris left in that road that we can take care of. If things blew up at the hospital, there's a lot of debris in that road. So all we're trying to do in our work is to be helpful in making sure this decision that the family would have made 3 weeks ago is going to be the one that they are going to be able to embrace now. If that decision would have been no, we work with a lot of Navajo families in Arizona, and 3 weeks ago that was a no. It's going to be a no today. Or in some of our Navajo families, it's now yes. So we don't know, but we're going to have a respectful conversation, investigate the values and the beliefs. And that sounds like such a nice little thing, isn't it? We, help families make their best decision based on their values and beliefs. But that's not always so easy to do. A family that has been praying for a miracle, hoping that their loved one will recover, and is telling the staff, that faith is very important to the way that they're seeing this moment, the situation, how they make decisions. When we meet that family, what we're going to do is explore what does their faith have to tell them about this decision for donation. Because we know that is the system out of which they see things. So we're going to incorporate that into our conversation. And we're going to do it in a very respectful, sensitive way, but we're going to do it in a way that brings out what is meaningful to that family so they can see the decision for what it is and not just in some other way. But if they're telling us these things are meaningful to us, that's going to be part of the conversation. So how to help families get beyond a reactionary decision to a considered decision. That's what we're doing. That's what we're really focused on. And what I mentioned before, being aware of families in hot emotional states and all those things that we can do. I love that video of the FaceTime, because all you have to think is that's all you're doing with these families. You're trying to, again, make them feel safe and secure. Those orphans from the Romanian orphanages, that they were raped, if you know that story, they were taken care of physically well. Emotionally, their care was absent. And these children, by not ever feeling safe and secure emotionally, never did well and only struggled in life. Our families, if we can take care of them emotionally and take care of those needs, doing FaceTime, all the stuff I talked about, they're going to be able to make a much more considered decision. So I'd like to talk about some things additionally to what we talked about with hot states. So I'm going to give you some simple math. When I was first began a donor network of Arizona, where I'm from, the gentleman who hired me, who's very funny, P.J. Garrity, said, Marcel, 33% of families will always say no to donation, 33% will always say yes, and 33% it will depend on the kind of conversation that you're having. And that is true. 33% will say yes to the plumber, 33% would say no to Jesus, and 33% it's going to depend on if we can really bring their values and beliefs into that moment so they can really consider this decision. The problem is, if donation is mentioned, is brought up at a time that is inappropriate to that family, and you don't know which 33% you're going to be speaking to. I mean, if you already knew this family is going to say no, but you never really know that, and I've learned that in everything I do, hospital setting, there's no way this family is going to say yes, and you get the most generous family once they walk out of the hot state. So it's tough to know that. But there are some families when donation is brought up at an early time or an inappropriate or insensitive way, all you're going to get is a reactionary no. And they're usually saying no to everything. They're saying, no, I can't believe he's dying. No, I can't accept this. No, no, no. And then donation gets tainted with a no. That's what we're trying to really avoid. If we share that whole thought of we help families make their best decision about donation in their worst moment, if we all work together to that end, we would simply want to make sure the debris is clear and set this up as best we can for that family. We can't set it up perfectly. Perfectly is a month later. That can't be. But we can set it up as best as we can. So when donation is brought up early on by a physician or a chaplain or a social worker or a doctor, usually the first thing is what I think they think families might say. Oh no, John's doing worse than we thought if the doctor's bringing up the possibility of donation. If we do get to that point where the doctor tells us nothing more can be done, donation would be a good thing, something that John would want to do. We think, I think that's what hospitals think. If we bring it up now, first of all, the family will get how serious this is, the gravity of the situation. Donation should never be used as a card to help families understand the gravity, because all of a sudden we've married donation to something really bad. More likely, we in that reactionary group, no, there's still hope. John's not dead, and there's no way I'm donating anything. They need to do everything possible and not give up. If that thought flashes, whether it's spoken or not, a lot of families have that thought. When we come to have that conversation, it is so much more difficult because they've grounded themselves in a reactionary no. And we'll talk a little more about that, but that is really difficult to open back up for a family. What we're asking for is simply this. Not that we can own the conversation with families, but we're simply looking for what we would call a planned donation path. And that is multiple huddles between staff in organ procurement staff, so a lot of meetings and what's going on with the family, how are they now, do they understand, all those things that we would typically talk about. And then this part, when do we introduce the donation conversation, with the family according to an explicitly agreed upon plan between hospital staff and organ procurement staff. So if Dr. Smith has been taking care of a particular patient for 2 years, let's say it's a 7-year-old that had an AVM, and this doctor knows this family really well, the plan might very well be that Dr. Smith is going to be part of this conversation at a time that is going to be appropriate for this family. So it's not to say that the organ procurement organization owns the conversation, but thinking what is best for this family in being able to make their best decision. That is always going to guide what the plan is. I don't know at any time why a donation conversation should happen in an unplanned way. We call those UMDs. And the resemblance to something else is supposed to be there. Because they tend to blow up. And nothing in a hospital, in my experience, happens in an unplanned way. We like to plan things in hospitals, and we're just asking for an agreed upon explicit plan with hospitals. What we have tracked since 2011, when there is an unplanned mention of donation by anyone in the hospital, there's a 13% less authorization in those cases, because you get that grounding of the no, and it's so difficult to really open that back up for a family. That's really all we're asking for, is an agreed upon plan in terms how are we going to take the debris away from the family and have a meaningful conversation. So Lady Gaga. This study was done by the grad student of Dan Ariely, who I mentioned before. So Troy Campbell did the study, and I call it the Lady Gaga study. I forget what he calls it. And what he did was he showed people, a group of people, 2 provocative photos of Lady Gaga. Use your imagination. And he showed them these photos, and he said, look at these, what do you think? They looked at them. He said, the next day he showed them the same photos again. Goes, take a look at these photos. And he kept exposing them to these photos, take a look at them. After about a week, he said, all right, you've looked at these photos for a week. Now I want you to predict for me. I'm going to show these photos to a brand new set of people. How will these people react when they see these photos of Lady Gaga? As you can imagine, the more habituated they came to looking at these provocative, I think they were semi-naked photos, they predicted that people would be pretty much not affected by looking at these photos. They got it wrong. People were affected when they saw them at the same time. What does that have to do with us and donation? The nice thing is, most of us have become very accustomed to donation. And we see families healing from donation. We see families feeling very good about their decision for donation. We've become very accustomed to donation, that families do say yes to donation. That's what way we think. That's a dangerous thought in the sense that we're so habituated, we're so used to the photos of Lady Gaga, and we think, okay, the family will not be shocked if I bring this up at an early time. That's the way we start to think, because so many families do say yes to donation. This family will not be shocked, and that prediction is way off. If we bring up donation at an inappropriate, insensitive time for this particular family where they are emotionally, they will be shocked by the pictures of Lady Gaga. They will be shocked by donation, and therefore that colors the whole conversation, and it doesn't help families to make their best decision in their worst moment. So it's great that people have become so accustomed to donation. And I think right here in Washington State, the registered donor rate is at 82%? 82%. I mean, do you know what that means? Like every time you have, it's 4 out of 5 of your patients are registered donors. I can gather why you would think everyone's a donor, because really in your state they are. In our state it's only 46%. In Arizona you only have to get your license every 30 years. Yeah, every 30 years, whether you want to or not. Yeah, so we don't visit the MVD for a long, long time. Therefore, our cycle is really, it's not helpful for growing the registry, so we're trying to combat that. So you're becoming very used to donation, which is great. But it also poses that problems. You know, we were tackling this in our organization. It just seemed like all of a sudden all these people were mentioning donation, like just willy-nilly, just bringing it up at any time to the family. And what we discovered, what was behind it was not really that people were trying to be insensitive. It's that they were so habituated to donation, they didn't realize the impact it was having upon the families at the time it was being brought up to that family. Emotional overspill. So this is a big one that connects to when we mention donation at an inappropriate time for that family. So the study that was done was with a movie and a show. So any of you see the movie Life is a House with Kevin Kline? The particular scene, so they gather two groups of people, 50 and 50. And this 50, they show a scene from the movie Life is a House with Kevin Kline. Kevin Kline in the movie is an architect. He's an architect that has made tons of money for this firm, and he gets fired. He gets fired because he's too expensive. Now he's making more money, and they think we can get rid of him. And so they fire him. He kind of loses it and goes berserk and breaks a lot of his models. And the people, this 50 is asked to talk about and write about a time in their life they were treated unfairly, unjustly. And they write stuff down. That's this group. This group of 50 is shown a different scene. They're shown something from Friends with Chandler Bing, and it's a New Year's resolution episode. And Chandler has made the resolution he will not make fun of Ross's girlfriend's names anymore. So this 50 sees a very funny little light piece from this, and then afterwards they're asked to reflect on New Year's resolutions that they've made and broken, and they write that up. That's the first part of the study. Then they give them a break. Give them a break and say, come back later. Both groups come back later. And then they play this game called the ultimatum game. Have any of you heard of the ultimatum game? It's probably the most played game in psychological circles. So the way this game is played is I am the giver. I have $100, and I'm going to play this game with Valerie. And the way it plays is I have to make a decision of how much money I want to give Valerie. The only way I get to keep any of the money that was given to me is if Valerie agrees to what I offer her. So, Valerie, I've got $100. I'm going to give you 20 and keep 80. Is that okay with you? So Valerie, now does that make any sense? Valerie had no money. I'm giving her a free $20, and she's saying no. But the way people play this game is they play it with a sense of fairness and justice. So if Valerie is saying, oh no, you're not keeping that 80, that's not a fair offer. So the game has been studied in the way that most people play it. And so usually the split is, Valerie, I'm going to give you 40 and keep 60. Is that okay with you? So most people at the 60-40 level go, that's good. A lot of people do a 50-50 split. So the two groups now. So this group has seen life as a house, that, injustice scene. In this group has seen the friend scene about really nothing, lightness. So the group that saw life as a house, now this has nothing to do with this game they're now playing, but the group exposed to emotional upheaval through the injustice, unfairness. So I offer you, I say, I'm going to give you 40, I'm going to keep 60. You go, no way. Because you're still angry about the injustice, the unfairness. The group that was exposed to this particular scene, this has been repeated multiple times, people have emotional overspill from things that they experienced or news they were told, and it bleeds into other stuff. This group that saw life, the Friends episode, so I say to Valerie, I'm going to keep $90 and give you 10. Is that okay with you? Sure. And Valerie, who has seen the Friends episode, who's feeling pretty good, says, yeah, that's fine. That emotion has bled, of lightness, of feeling pretty good, has bled into her decision. So we get emotional overspill all the time. So think of how that applies to these conversations that you are having with families at hospitals. So, you're about to say this is a grave prognosis, your loved one is not doing well, you may want to start thinking of donation. All of a sudden, you've got all this emotional overspill onto donation that has nothing to do with donation. We all know emotional overspill. You wake up on the wrong side of the bed, you take it out on everyone. We all have that kind of emotional spill. And it just happens at hospitals all the time when donation is mentioned at the wrong time. There's no perfect time, but there is a better time. We just had a physician tell us, we were asking for a little more time because we could see that the family was not doing well. And when I say we can see, I'm studying particular things. If the family is not eating or drinking, if they're not connecting with one another, I know they're still in a very hot state. I'm looking for particular signs that tell me the family is readjusting to what's happening. And so we said to that doctor, just give us a little more time. The doctor said, it's going to be the same now as it is going to be in 6 hours. First of all, I don't believe that. And that's not what we see when we actually take care and take time with families to let them be at a better place. So when you do bring up at a time of bad news and it spills over emotionally and the family gives you that reactionary no, it anchors their decision. They hear themselves saying, no, there's no way I am going to donate. And there's a concept called self-hurting. We continue to do what we said we would do. And when we hear ourselves say, no, I am not doing that, we've anchored that decision, and all we've taken away is that family's best decision from 3 weeks ago. We've anchored them in something. We didn't intend it, but it can so easily happen when we are bringing this up at a time where emotional overspill is very likely to enter into play. Any of you are familiar with Daniel Kahneman's book? So again, he won the Nobel Prize in 2003 for this book. And it really is the most incredible book. And Daniel Kahneman talks about 2 ways that we make decisions. He talks about system 1. System 1 is quick in gut reaction, in pattern recognition, in association. 95% of our decisions each day are made through system 1. And every day we make thousands upon thousands of decisions, whether we realize it or not. System 2 is much more analytical. And we take time to reflect, like what's 37 times 82? You need system 2 to do that. If I show you this face, you know exactly what this face is about because that's system 1. Anyway, Daniel Kahneman, but there's a lot of stuff, great book on decision making. Every other book that is about decision making is all the stuff that Daniel Kahneman has been doing since the 1960s. So in that book, I just mentioned that because there's a lot of insight into families making decisions, because really everything we do is about helping families make that best decision in their worst moment. A decision is a decision is a decision, or is it? So a doctor's saying it doesn't matter when you talk to them, it's a decision they've got to make. It's going to be the same now as it is 6 hours from now, or is it? So let's explore that a little. So in Kahneman's book, he talks about a study that was done unwittingly on Israeli parole judges. So 8 judges in Israel, and it's like clockwork. So these judges eat breakfast, and they start hearing cases, parole cases. Parole is only granted 35% of the time. That's the average. And the case lasts, in the presentation, 6 minutes before they move on to the next case. So they have breakfast, they start hearing cases, they work up to a mid-morning snack, they have a snack, then they start hearing more cases, and they go up to lunch. After lunch, they start hearing more cases, they had a mid-afternoon snack, and then they work right up to dinner. What they found when they plotted out when parole was granted, can you guess this? So after breakfast, they grant parole a lot. They're feeling pretty good. They just were fed. And as they come up to the break, parole drops to 0. So it's not that 35% of the time parole is granted. It's when it's granted. And then they have their snack, and then parole goes back up. And then closer to lunch, it drops back down. It's all about food. When their glucose is higher, and when they're not tired and not feeling hungry, all of a sudden they make different decisions. Think of the families that we're working with. They're tired, they're hungry. All of those things put them in a different state of mind, a different way for them to consider the decision before them. You probably have heard this study. So they get a bunch of college males and they ask them the question, how happy are you with your life on a scale of 8 to 10? And most of them go, 1 to 10. Most of them give 8 to 10 would be 9, I suppose. From 1 to 10, and most of them say, about an 8. And then they ask them the question, how many dates have you had in the last month? 2, 3, 5, whatever it is. Then they flip those questions. They ask another group, how many dates have you had in the last month? 2, 3. Then they ask them the second question, how happy are you with your life? Depending on the number of dates from the first answer, all of a sudden they're only at a 4 for how comfortable they feel with how happy they are with their life. So a decision is not a decision is not a decision. So even the way we're entering into these moments with these families matters. We talked about cognitive overload. You probably have read about the jam study. So in supermarkets, if you come across 6 jams, you're 30% more apt to buy a jar of jam if you're looking for jam than if you came across 24. If you come across 24, you can't make a decision. It is too much. So people don't buy. Like when you have so much information, you're on cognitive overload. So even families, when we sometimes get to them, they are on cognitive overload. And what do you hear families say? I just want all of this to be done with. What does that tell you? That's not a best decision. That's a family in cognitive overload in a hot state that simply wants to get out of it. So a decision is not a decision is not a decision. A lot of it has to do with our sensitivity to clearing the debris, to helping that family. Daniel Kahneman, when system 2 is overloaded, people are more apt to make selfish decisions and make superficial social judgments because they want to get out of their hot emotional state. It's so uncomfortable. Here's a question that often comes up. So you're saying you don't want us to bring up donation to this family at an earlier time when we know that donation will be a consideration for a family. What about transparency and honesty? I've been taking care of this family and I just feel like I need to be completely upfront with this family. That's part of my care. Have you heard that kind of statement before? Yeah. So in my experience, the minute a patient or a family enters the hospital, these are the 3 operative questions that physicians and nurses begin asking. What do I say to this family? How do I say it? And when do I say it? So if someone presents to a hospital with a Glasgow Coma score of 5 or less, I know statistically there's a 75% chance that patient is dying. There's a 10% chance of a meaningful recovery. There's a 15% chance of not so good recovery. would I ever say that to that family? It's true. That's information that I think if we make decisions all the time about when can this family hear something that will be meaningful to them. So right from the time a family arrives at the hospital, we're constantly assessing when do I say it, how do I say it, and what do I say it? What do I say? So ethically, I think, it would be wonderful if always it was choosing between good and evil, good and a bad decision. But it's never that. It's always choosing between good and good, or good and a different good, or good and the better. Transparency is respectful and good. Bringing up donation at a time the family is ready for that conversation is respectful and good as well. So it's not as simple as saying, I need to be honest and transparent. If you're going to be honest and transparent and bring it up at a time of emotional overspill, aren't we robbing that family of their best consideration of this decision for donation? That's not good. So it's being able to work together. What is really going to set it up for that family that they can make their best decision? That's all we're asking. This is Dr. Joseph Zabransky. I think you know him. He operated on Bret Michaels. He's from my neck of the woods. When he's speaking to his residents, this is his line: we don't mention donation because that sends a message to the families of your patients that you've given up on their loved one. So he very much frames it from a point of view of conflict of interest. If the family perceives you're taking care of their loved one and you bring up donation, they think you've already given up, and that says something about the hospital and might color their whole sense of their experience with you. I think when donation is mentioned by hospital staff early on, it's because they want to offer hope. We heard that earlier. When we want to offer hope to a family and we think we are bringing up donation to them, what we are really offering them and the picture we want for them is Penny Gorman, a 3-year-old heart recipient, because we know this would warm the heart of this family if we bring it up. And the truth is, that's not what this family, when donation is mentioned, is picking up on. They're not getting there, not at this particular time. How many of you have been involved on the donation side in cases with families? Have you all seen that kind of tipping point when families start rooting for donation in the recipients? That doesn't happen till much later on. It's usually, I would say, 20 hours into that case that you all of a sudden start seeing families vested in who will receive these gifts from my loved one. They're not there 20 hours before. They're not picturing Penny Gorman. They're just not there yet. So this is a real statement from a family we just had. So donation was brought up early on to this family, and the mom said, "Who wants to steal my son's organs?" That was her statement. Doctor was shocked, and no one wants to steal his organs, but that's where the discussion began. In that hot state, inappropriate time, mom is still hoping for her son and having none of this. That's a reaction that oftentimes we might get when we think we're offering Penny Gorman. The family is thinking this: who wants to steal the organs? This is from a physician that asked to remain nameless. But her thought about bringing up donation to a family is this: bringing up donation to some families while they perceive their loved one is still being cared for by the hospital team is like handing them a list of funeral homes. That association of the finality is not going to be good. All we're trying to do, again, is have a clear path for this family to consider donation. And I say this countless times: donation is a conversation, not a question, and never a mention. That word conversation in my mind conveys we're sitting down with families, we're meeting them, all that hot state stuff I spoke about. We're trying to make a human connection. We're trying to provide a sense of safety and soothing in this moment for this family. And if we go in and simply think donation is a question, yes or no, check the box. Maybe at the MVD in a cool state it's that, or maybe when you have a registration form in a cool state it's that. It's not that in a hot state. It's a conversation that explores values and beliefs and has some depth to it. It's never just, I'm going to pop the question here, yes or no, tell me what you'd like to do. What's behind, when you get those reactionary no's, and you could probably tell me what's behind the no's, but a lot of times it's the fact that people don't understand brain death. They don't believe their loved one is actually dead. They believe something's wrong with the brain. A lot of times families simply don't understand what brain death is. Thank you. What brain death is. And if they don't believe their loved one is dead, there's no way they're going to donate. So I'm going to just, I've been trying to make this, I think we confuse families with brain death explanations. So I've been playing in my mind in, having different kinds of conversations with families. So this is the way when I'm going in to kind of piggyback upon a brain death conversation, this is the way I'm speaking to donation, to brain death. As most of us know, when our heart stops, we cease breathing and we die. It's the same with the brain. When the brain stops, we cease breathing and we die. John's brain has stopped. By stopped, I mean all the cells in his brain have died. The ventilator is simply filling his air with lungs. The machines are helping to keep his heart pumping, but there's no blood and oxygen flowing to his brain. All of this is irreversible and final. And all of this is a way of saying that John has taken his last breath. John has died. The breath is a simple way. I can get much more complicated with that. I can talk about different parts of the brain, but I'm just experimenting, so you tell me, if you're speaking to a family in that very basic way, I know some families would require much more sophistication, I get that, but in terms of, does that sound like a reasonable place to begin? I think we make it much too difficult for some families, is the truth. So a lot of times, we spend a lot of time, how do we better help families understand what we're doing? So if they don't get brain death, there's no way they get to donation. If they don't believe their loved one has died, they're not going to say yes to help someone else. If it's an angry family, a lot of times we hear from hospital staff, there's no way this family is going to say yes to donation. All they're doing is reacting to the moment. It doesn't mean they're going to say no to donation because they're angry in this moment. So we know we're going to look beyond the emotion of this moment to realize for many of these families that were initially angry, they have been the kindest families that we have ever met. And so it's realizing maybe the no is about the initial anger and that emotional overspill. What we found is a family cannot hold two realities at the same time. If the family is still hoping and praying for a miracle, there's no way they're going to say yes to donation. They need some time to reverence that moment of their waiting, and a lot of hospitals work nicely with us to give some time. It can't be an indeterminate amount of time, but obviously a little time, and then many families have turned around and said, it wasn't our miracle, but we're going to give it to someone else because that is their perspective. This often happens for us. So what we're trying to do is clarify with families some contrary thoughts. So this is a herring gull, if you didn't recognize it. And don't ask me why they torture these poor herring gulls, but they do research with them. And herring gulls will hatch any egg. Any female herring gull, if you put an egg here, a female herring gull will sit on that egg and try to hatch it, just because that's their nature. If you take an egg and you color it red, then you get this kind of schizophrenic thing. So the female herring gull will want to hatch any egg, but they hate the color red. They're afraid of it. So what you will see a herring gull do is try to hatch the egg and destroy it at the same time. That's what we encounter with families. You'll encounter a family that would say, there's no way you are touching my loved one. You are not going to cut into my loved one. There's no way that's going to happen. And on a further conversation with the family, saving the life of another one would be so important to John. You get two things going on. And what we're trying to do in that moment is to do a little values clarification, if you will, hierarchy of values. What, in the end, what 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years from now is going to be most significant to that family? And again, that takes a conversation, not a question. Because the overwhelming answer when the mom is thinking there's no way you're putting a hand on my son, it's a quick no, because there's really no exploration of those values. And that's what we're trying to do in these conversations, realizing that families can hold different kinds of values that might say different things, and it's really to help that family see what will be most meaningful to them. As I talked about before, it's a neural hijacking of the thinking brain in these hot states. It's the family's 9/11. They're being terrorized by the events of the day. So all that hot state stuff that we talked about needs to be brought into that family care. So here's a basic question at the end of this talk. Is there anything to be gained by bringing up donation to a family in an unplanned way? There isn't. If that family would say yes to donation 5 hours from now, bringing it up at this point only invites perhaps a reactionary no. And if they would have said yes in this moment, if they're part of that 33%, they will say yes 5 hours from now. There's nothing to be gained by bringing up donation in an unplanned way outside of what we agree upon what would be best for the family. So I've been doing this work since 1998. If you asked me in 1998 what I did, I would have answered, I work in the field of organ and tissue donation. If you ask me in 2013 what I do, I say I work in the field of generosity. And organs and tissues are the way that generosity gets expressed. So what we have learned is we listen to the people who have said yes to donation to share life. We listen to the way they speak of donation. They do not speak of organs and tissues. They speak of the values of their loved one, the values of their family. They speak of generosity. They speak of compassion. I'm sure maybe you haven't, but if you haven't been to any of the donor family ceremonies that are hosted here, families will get up and speak about their loved one. They don't speak about organs and tissues. They speak about their loved one's generosity, their loved one's bigness of heart. They speak about all these wonderful things. And that's what we've learned. This little girl, Cheyenne Renee Mattingly, so we do these memorial cards for our families, and little Cheyenne was, obviously not very old. Her family made the decision to donate because just 6 months before her accident, Cheyenne had cut her hair and donated on her own to Locks of Love. So when the conversation was for donation, it's not like the family immediately said, oh my God, this is wonderful. But when we had that conversation about who Cheyenne is, that family quickly embraced donation as a tribute to her. So what we have learned is, again, donation is not about organs and tissues. It really is about speaking to their loved ones' values and beliefs. And usually it's about generosity that we are inviting that family to see. Again, I love saying this, donation is not a clinical endeavor, it's a human endeavor that speaks to generosity. That's what we do. We invite generosity. That's what our conversations are about. The way I see the work that we do, I love when people get transplanted and those recipients go on to have big lives, because usually they ask the operative question, how do I pay it forward? And they create this wonderful effect of generosity and compassion. Not always, I get that. But a lot of times our recipients ask, how do I give back? How do I pay it forward? And that creates this wonderful dynamic. But beyond the recipients, and I write this to the families in our aftercare, most people are aware of, the physical impact of donation upon the recipients. Much less known is the decision for itself grows generosity in our world. People are moved when they hear that a family embraced donation, whether anyone ever got transplanted or not. That's very much the way we speak of donation. We speak of donation, I was mentioning this before, we always speak of donation in 3 separate and distinct moments. The first moment is about an individual or a family's decision of generosity to want to help others. The second moment is whether organs and tissues get transplanted. And that moment doesn't belong to the family or the individual. It belongs to the CDC, the FDA, and transplantation guidelines. The third moment is whether the recovered organs and tissues get transplanted, and those belong to a transplant surgeon or a transplant team. So the only moment that belongs to a family is this first moment of saying yes to donation. That's the moment we always honor with that family. So for us, we have many families that said yes to donation, and we haven't recovered any organs and tissues, and we completely honor that person as a giver of life by the fact, what's the difference between a donor in spirit or a willing donor and an innate organ donor? Guidelines, not generosity. So that has changed the way we speak of donation. So, you go to these registration tables for donation, and usually someone comes up to the table and says, I'd like to donate, but, I've got diabetes, I've got arthritis, I don't have anything you want. And the old conversation used to be, well, tell me a little more about your medical history, we talk about suitability and crazy stuff. And now our conversation is, donation is all about a decision of generosity. If it's important for you to give witness to other Arizonans about generosity, we ask that you register. We don't know what's possible in the way of recovery, but we do know this stands for generosity in our state. It changes the whole tone of the conversation. That's how we see our conversations with families. That's how we see our conversation about all of this. That's what we've learned from the families that we've come to work with. By the way, that same mom that said, "Who wants to steal my son's organs?" the next day, in a little better place, speaking to her son's values in a more reflective way, got to say, "Doing this to save lives is marvelous." Pretty good line. And there was a line earlier today on that video, that was really powerful, and you probably heard it. The donor dad of Alex had said, "We missed him terribly, and now we miss him wonderfully." Which again is that transition from that terrible moment of such pain to still pain, but now somehow there's new texture to that with some hope. So thanks very much.